What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So after last night's blockbuster that was the Mikko Rantanen trade, which I would argue is just point blank one of the biggest trades in NHL history, surely of the 21st century, and in my opinion, the second biggest of the 2020s. I still think the Matthew Tkachuk and Huberdeau and Weegar deal is bigger in terms of the fact that there was like two superstar forwards and a top 15 defenseman involved. Martin Nate just doesn't exactly equate that. But yeah, I thought it'd be a fun idea because it's such a massive trade. And on my Instagram, I posted a graphic showing the top 10 players of the 2020s to get traded. Feel free to go check that out. That we would go through and regrade the biggest deals of the 2020s. I thought this would be a fun idea. And with this, we're going to be using hindsight. What has happened in the following years since these deals? Did the pieces, did the first, second round picks, did they end up panning out? So right now, how those deals, how the dust has settled on those deals, how they would grade out right now. So we're going to go in descending order. We're going to start with the most recent deals and work our way down all the way to 2020. And let's get into it. We're going to be giving out some grades. And up first, the Linus Ullmark deal. Ullmark for Joonas Korpisalo. They retained $1 million on that. Mark Kastelik and a 2024 first-round pick. I think for the Ottawa Senators, we're going to start with the buyers on this. You got to go with an A, considering the fact that Ullmark, you got him on your team for a late first-round pick. You got off most of Korpisalo's contract. Kastelik, you weren't really losing any sleep on. And Ullmark, when he has been healthy, after a rough start, he's been amazing. And overall in the season, has a .915 save percentage for Ottawa. They had just badly, severely been missing that goalie because Korpisalo busted. Other guys didn't really pan out. And now they hopefully have their franchise goalie. He is starting to get up there in age, and maybe you had some concerns about that extension, 4 years, $8.25 million. But based on what they gave up and how Ullmark has looked, this has definitely been a very good deal for the Ottawa Senators. For the Boston Bruins, I'm going to go with a D. When you look at Korpisalo, had a decent start for them, but is now sitting at $8.99, making $3 million for the next 4 seasons. You look at a guy like Anthony Stolarz in division that they could have got him free agency at only $2.5 million. I wasn't too keen on them acquiring Korpisalo. And Dean Letourneau, although he's 6'7", he's definitely a long-term project. He has just 2 assists in 21 games right now on a damn good Boston College team, so that's not looking that good. Kastelik has been an effective bottom sixer, but yeah, considering you had a Vezina winning, a year removed from a Vezina win, in Ullmark, who was only making $5 million next season, and you got this lackluster of a package, and your first-round pick doesn't look that good. Kind of a disaster for the Boston Bruins. Next up, this is the only 2024 deadline deal I'm going to be doing, considering I made a full video breaking or looking back at the 2024 deadline, so feel free to go check that out. But yeah, Jake Guentzel to the Carolina Hurricanes for Michael Bunting, Vasily Ponomarev, Ville Koivunen, Cruz Lucius, and a 2024 second-round pick and a conditional 2025 fifth-round pick. When looking at this from Carolina's perspective, I'm going to go with an A-, although they clearly didn't go on a deep Stanley Cup run. It wasn't because of Guentzel. Guentzel was fantastic for them. He had 25 points in 17 regular season games for Carolina, and then in the playoffs, he had 9 points in 11 games. They made a splashy deadline acquisition that they hadn't done in prior years and didn't give up a first-round pick and didn't give up a top-5 prospect. They gave up a large quantity of prospects, but it was a lot of their 6 through 11 guys that honestly didn't have spots on the team in the next 2 to 3 years. So this was a great deal, in my opinion, for the Carolina Hurricanes. For Pittsburgh, I'll go with a B, considering I do think that they can flip Michael Bunting probably next year for a decent pick. Harrison Brunnicki is looking like a pretty good pick for second round. He arguably should have gone in the late first round. And on Pittsburgh, those guys could maybe develop into something, the 3 prospects that they did get, because they have so many spots that are going to be opening up within their forward core. So I can't crush Pittsburgh. It's still definitely underwhelming. They opted for quantity over quality. They probably should have got some kind of first-round pick or a true blue-chip prospect, but I can't fully crush them, and I think that it was smart to move off of Jake Guentzel instead of giving him some kind of 8-year, $9 million deal like Tampa Bay. It's great for Tampa Bay, considering they're contending, but for Pittsburgh, I think a B, maybe a B-, but I'm going to go with a B. Erik Karlsson, another Pittsburgh trade when Pittsburgh went aggressive and then 9 months later traded Guentzel. We have to use the graphic, considering it's a 3-team deal with this one, but Pittsburgh got Karlsson, Pitlick, I'm not even... Dylan Hamelic, and a third-round pick. San Jose got a first-round pick, Mikael Granlund, Jan Ruda, Mike Hoffman, and then Montreal got a second-round pick, Jeff Petrie, Casey DeSmith, and Nathan Legare. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that one right. But for San Jose, I think that this got to be an A+, considering they moved off Karlsson, only had to retain $1 million on that. They ended up getting Mikael Granlund, who they could either flip at this year's deadline or just keep him for like a 3 to 4 year deal, and him yet again be an amazing mentor for guys like Will Smith, Matt Guentzel, Brini, as well as a guy that they acquired in this deal in terms of the draft pick. It was 14th overall. They used that pick to trade up to 11th, and a guy like Sam Dickinson. So they got Dickinson, they got Granlund. Great deal. Great deal for the San Jose Sharks. They arguably got the best player in this trade when they were trading a Norris Witter. Absolute slam dunk for the San Jose Sharks. For the Pittsburgh Penguins, I'm going to go with a C. You can't crucify. It is kind of hindsight to criticize for them to giving up Mikael Granlund. He was bad on Pittsburgh, but yeah, it was only like a 20-game sample size. They went aggressive on Karlsson. They gave up a first-round pick. They gave up a second. They did also get a third-round pick, so you got to factor that in. But at the end of the day, Erik Karlsson, it was a little bit disappointing for Pittsburgh. He's been a good top pair off of the defenseman. You weren't expecting Norris 2.0 kind of run from Erik Karlsson, but you were expecting a 70 to 80 point guy. That has not exactly been the case at a $10 million cap hit. It has definitely been underwhelming for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and he's not going to be movable for at least the next 2 seasons as they try to retool at least or rebuild. Not a good deal for Pittsburgh, but not a disaster because, again, they did shed some decent money with guys like Jeff Petrie, and Mikael Granlund at the time. As for Montreal, you got to give an A on this situation, considering they got a second-round pick. They ended up trading Jeff Petrie and Casey DeSmith. That's who they took on to get that second-round pick, and they ended up flipping them for, I believe, like mid-round picks. Very good deal for Montreal. Next up, the second DeBrincat deal, first one that we're going to be doing in this video. When he went to the Detroit Red Wings, it was for Kubalik, Sabrango, and a conditional first-round pick and a fourth-round pick. For Detroit, you got to go with an A. DeBrincat, they really used the leverage here to get the hometown kid back. And while DeBrincat maybe isn't that 40-plus goal pace guy that we thought when he was playing with Patrick Kane, he's an effective 30-ish goal, 70-ish point guy. They have him locked up in his prime at $7.8 million and only gave up what ended up being a late first-round pick, a first-round pick that they got from the Tyler Bertuzzi trade back in 2023. So, yeah, thumbs up. Steve Yzerman getting a core piece for his top 6 of the future. Very, very good move by them. For Ottawa, I'm going to go with a B. This trade isolated is not that impressive, but considering they flipped that first-round pick to eventually get Linus Ullmark, that was the key piece in the Ullmark trade, I think you'll live with it. I think that deal is forgiven. Before that Ullmark deal, this was probably like a D+, arguably, considering Kubalik was so bad, and Sabrango really isn't going to turn into anything. But yeah, for Ottawa, considering they flipped that, there's a decent amount of like webs within this video that you're going to see. This deal eventually turned into that deal and so on. So I think you can forgive this deal for Ottawa, although it was pretty shit. They get a B. The Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, one of the Pierre-Luc Dubois trades that will be on this in this video, to LA for Gabe Vilardi, Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari in a 2024 second-round pick. For LA, a year ago, this was a straight-up F, considering PLD was brutal for them, 40 points in his first season, signed on that 8-year, $8.5 million contract. I'm going to go with a D now because they did flip PLD for Darcy Kemper, who has been so good as a starter for them. It's still not good. I'm still not a fan of this deal, but it has been half decent. PLD has also turned it around in Washington, don't get me wrong. But yeah, they eventually got a solid starting goaltender. How long will Kemper be able to play at this level given his age? We'll see, but it's not a full one of the worst trades ever considering what they were able to flip PLD for. For the Winnipeg Jets, I think it's a pretty easy A+. They avoided giving PLD some kind of monster deal, and if he was going to stay in Winnipeg, it probably would have been like a $9 million deal. They end up trading him. Vilardi was so much better than PLD last season, and this season is playing pretty goddamn elite. 20 goals, 23 assists, 43 points in 50 games right now for the Winnipeg Jets. The last 2 years, he's only been making like $3.4 million. Going to be interesting to see what that extension looks like. He is an RFA, as well as picking up the 37th overall pick that was formerly the Montreal Canadiens. They picked Alphonse Frey, who I'm still pretty high on. He was like my number 22nd prospect in the 2024 draft. Got him at 37th. Great deal by Kevin Cheveldayoff, the most underrated general manager in the entire NHL. Next up, going back to the Ottawa Senators, Jakob Chychrun to Ottawa from Arizona at the time, but now Utah. Ottawa, I can't forgive them for this deal. This is probably a D when looking at it. Chychrun was good for them, but it just never was a fit considering he was a lefty, considering they had Jake Sanderson and Thomas Chabot. They gave up a decent amount, the 12th overall pick as well as a second. So, yeah, they eventually flipped Chychrun for only Nick Jensen, who was a better fit and is playing good, and only a third-round pick. But, yeah, Chychrun was there for, a season and a half. Ottawa didn't sniff the playoffs in that season and a half. Straight up disaster in terms of them. I don't hate them taking that swing, but just wasn't a good fit even at the time and definitely did not pan out. So as for the Arizona Coyotes, I'm going to go with an A-. You got a first and a second round pick. You thought maybe you could get more if you retained, but they ended up selecting Daniil Boot with that 12th overall pick, which was definitely a little bit of a reach on draft night, but with the way that he's been progressing over in the KHL, looks pretty encouraging. 6'6" guy, definitely has a high ceiling. And as for that second round pick, they ended up shipping that out to the New Jersey Devils to get John Marino. So good asset management by, I almost just said Doug Armstrong, Bill Armstrong over in Arizona at the time. Now Utah. Next trade, we got the Timo Meier to New Jersey deal. New Jersey, I'm going to give a C- for this. This deal has not really aged. Actually, let me bring up the trade again. This deal has not aged good. Timo Meier, I don't even know. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of those four other guys. But for Andreas Johnson, Shakir Mukhamdulin, Fabian Zetterlund, and a first-round pick in 2023, a conditional second in 2024, and a 2024 seventh-round pick. And yeah, for New Jersey, Timo Meier has not lived up to the billing. The season before he was traded, he had 36 goals, 76 points in 77 games total. He was an absolute monster to start that season. In 57 games with the San Jose Sharks, he had 31 goals. Looked like one of the better goal-scoring wingers in the entire NHL. Physical presence. Gets traded to New Jersey. Since he's been in New Jersey, he has just 51 goals, 48 assists, 99 points in 139 games. That's good for 30-goal, 28, 58-point pace. That's unacceptable considering he's locked up on an 8-year deal at $8.8 million. This is a swing and a miss for a guy in Fitzgerald that I think has done a really good job as a general manager. He pulled the trigger on this one. And again, Timo Meier is still a very good player. Maybe he could turn it around, but we now have 2 full seasons at this point. Half of one season, last year full season, now another half. Timo Meier hasn't really lived up to the billing in terms of what they traded him for, as well as more so the contract is just too much. He's been a $7 million player, not really an $8.8 million player. In terms of the San Jose Sharks, I'm going to go with an A-. So we still got to see how the prospects end up panning out. But Fabian Zetterlund's been like 75-80% of what Timo Meier has been in terms of being on the San Jose Sharks. Looks like a solid piece of the future in that middle six, on top of Shakir has been very good in the AHL last year. Maybe can turn into a second pair, if not a third pair defenseman. And Quinton Musty, 2 points per game, basically the last season and a half in the OHL. Will his skating translate to the NHL? I'm still not so sure, but he definitely has the offensive talent to be a special player. In that second round pick that they got, they ended up packaging with that 14th overall pick that they got from the Pittsburgh Penguins to get Sam Dickinson. So this could easily turn into an A+ if one of Musty or Dickinson or Shakir end up really hitting. Right now, I'm going to go with an A- just because we haven't really seen those prospects at the NHL level, but still another very good deal for the San Jose Sharks. Mike Rear is a beast. Next up, I'm reliving some trauma with this one, some PTSD. Bo Horvat to the Islanders for Anthony Beauvillier, Aatu and a 2023 first-round pick. The Islanders basically just locked up mediocrity with this trade in terms of being a team that's too good to tank, too bad to make any serious impact come playoff time. Bo Horvat individually has been a fine player, probably like a $7.5 million player ever since he got to the New York Islanders, but at an 8-year, $8.5 million cap hit, just doesn't move the needle in any way. They basically gutted the prospect pool by trading Aatu as well as that 2023 first-round pick. Imagine if we had Cole Eiserman and Axel Sandin Palika in our system right now. So yeah, C- for the New York Islanders. I can't kill them because again, Horvat's still a very good player. You could argue a D+. And as for Vancouver, I'll go with a B+. They ended up trading that first-round pick, obviously in the Philip Hronik trade, as well as attaching a second-round pick. Hronik was a far better fit for the team at the time, considering Bo Horvat needed that big contract. And yeah, they needed a defenseman to pair with Quinn Hughes. They didn't need another goddamn center locked up, or I guess they didn't lock up Elias Pettersson at the time, but you get what I mean. They didn't need more forwards. They needed more defensemen. They needed to get more balanced. And although they're not massively kicking themselves over the Axel Sandin panning out, considering they already had a beast, undersized offensive defenseman. So yeah, C- for my Islanders, a B+ for the Vancouver Canucks. Matthew Tkachuk to the Florida Panthers for Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, Cole Schwindt, and a 2025 first-round pick. Pretty easy. Florida Panthers, A+, considering Matthew Tkachuk walked in there, put up 109 points. Hart finalist, made the Cup final. Then this season won a Stanley Cup on that 8-year deal at $9.5 million and is a top 11 to 20 player in the entire NHL. As for the Calgary Flames, I think you got to go with an F, just considering Huberdeau immediately signed that extension, immediately started sucking it up, and basically sent them into a rebuild. As a result, they had to sell pretty heavily. And now Mackenzie Weegar, on the flip side of that, he's been so good that he's like keeping them out of getting a high pick this season. They're going to lose their first round pick to Montreal. They're going to get Florida's, funny enough, and instead, because of the Sean Monahan trade and so on. But yeah, so for Calgary, brutal. And now they thought they were going to improve the following season in this deal. They got worse, and now they have a pretty bleh outlook going forward. The other DeBrincat trade from Chicago to Ottawa, the 7th overall pick, the 39th overall pick in the 2024 third round pick in this one. Monster deal for Ottawa. I'm going with a D. They only got one. Good, but not as expected. He was coming off 41 goals, 37 assists, 78 points. You got a 66-point season out of DeBrincat where, again, you missed the playoffs, and then you end up trading him for only 25th overall. I know you could also use the logic that I did with the DeBrincat trade leading to Ullmark, like, again, but I think that this was just so disappointing considering they gave up the 7th, 39th, and 72nd for a guy that they thought maybe was going to be part of their long-term core. Ended up not being the case. Yes, it eventually led to Ullmark, but this trade was a disaster for them. In terms of Chicago, though, I don't think that they've absolutely hit it out of the park with said picks. I still think Kevin Korchinski can be a very good second-pair offensive defenseman. Lewinsky's not really doing much in the AHL, and AJ Spellacy, although a very intriguing prospect considering he got D1 football offers at like 15, 16 years old, but then he ended up going down the hockey route, which is clearly the right choice considering it looks like he's going to play in the NHL, but hasn't really taken a massive step in the OHL. So I'm going to go with a B- for Chicago right now. Obviously made the right decision to get DeBrincat, and at the time they got a serious haul, 7th overall. At the time I probably gave it like an A-, but haven't quite hit on those picks yet. So I'm going to go with a B-, maybe a B, but as of right now, I think a B- is fair. The Kevin Fiala trade, one of the most interesting trades of the 2020s and kind of the ultimate win-win for both parties. For the LA Kings, I'm going to go with an A-. Kevin Fiala in his 2 prior seasons had been that elite guy that the LA Kings badly needed, because although Kopitar and Kopitar and Kempe are also elite in their own right, not exactly superstars. So they brought in Fiala, over a point per game in his first season, 70-ish points last year. This year has been a little bit disappointing, but the underlying numbers are still pretty encouraging. And yeah, for LA, although we're going to talk about Faber when we talk about Minnesota, they already had Doughty. They had Brant Clark, who they took a year ago, 8th overall. They had Jordan Spence. They were kind of set on the right side. So losing him, although again, it's unfortunate, losing that first round pick was unfortunate, wasn't the end of the world in the time, and I still don't hate them for doing this, even though I would give Minnesota an A+ with this deal, considering the context that they straight up couldn't re-sign Kevin Fiala because of the Parise and Suter buyouts. So they ended up trading Kevin Fiala, dumping him as a restricted free agent, and they got the defenseman of their future in Brock Faber. And Liam Öhgren last year had 19 points in 26 SHL games in his draft year +2. This year in the AHL has come over. Hasn't been that productive in the NHL, but has 23 points in 25 AHL games. So yeah, they got a franchise defenseman, as well as Öhgren looks like he's going to be a factor in the middle 6 for a guy that they literally couldn't pay. Amazing deal for the Minnesota Wild, but also very solid for the LA Kings. Next up, we got the Tampa Bay Brandon Hagel deal. Hagel, a 4th-round pick and a 4th-round pick for 2 first-round picks, Boris Tkachuk and Taylor Radish. I'm going to go with an A+ for Tampa Bay, as crazy as that is to say, considering the fact that it cost them 2 first-round picks. But Brandon Hagel has just been that damn good. When looking at it was a little bit surprising when they traded this, but not really when you dove into it, considering Hagel had 2.5 years left at $1.5 million, had been a monster on Chicago, helped them make the Stanley Cup final that year. The following 2 seasons was very good. Last year had 75 points while making $1.5 million, like the most cost-efficient player, arguably, in the entire NHL. And this year, his 8x6.5 is kicked in. He's like an $8.5 to $9.5 million player. Almost made my top 50 players in the entire NHL. Dominant both ways. So yeah, even though they gave up a 2 firsts, they ended up obviously being outside of the lottery and might not, I think, actually based on who's probably turned into decent players. But Tampa didn't need first-round picks. Their time is now. Amazing deal by Julien Brisebois. Again, very outside-the-box deal, and they're definitely reaping the benefits right now as Hagel's above point per game, having the best season of his career. Looks like a perennial 85 to 90 point guy while being awesome defensively. But for Chicago, I'm also going to give it an A. When looking at it, they got a first round pick. One of them turned into Oliver Moore. I think who's going to turn into an NHLer just because he's such a stellar skater. Will he put the rest together in terms of the playmaking and shooting to become that actual top 6 potential second line center? I don't know. And then the other first round pick, they ended up trading with the New York Islanders and getting Sasha Boisvert at 18th overall. So for Chicago, yes, you maybe could say hindsight, it'd be nice to have Hagel playing next to Bedard right now, but also maybe Hagel plays so good that they end up not getting Bedard in the 2023 season. Like he plays them out of some lottery balls. So they got Hagel for literally nothing. I think they just signed him in free agency, considering like Buffalo didn't want him, and you end up trading him like for 2 first-round picks a year and a half later. That's amazing. So this was another massive win-win for both parties. But even though Tampa Bay gave up 2 first-round picks, it's an A+ for them. The Eichel deal. Eichel to Buffalo. Vegas, got to be an A+ when looking at it. Yes, a guy in Alex Tuch that we're going to dive into more when we go up. Buffalo's perspective has turned into a very good player. Eichel clearly clears him, considering he's a legit number 1 center, top 15 player in the entire NHL. You won a Stanley Cup with Jack Eichel, and although you gave up a young prospect and a first-round pick, Vegas was so aggressively win now that this was truly the move that really put them over the top and eventually got them to win a Stanley Cup. For Buffalo, though, I'm going to still go with a B+. Alex Tuch is a 70-ish point, legit, elite, borderline elite first liner in the NHL, and still is pretty young. I think he's a year older or a year younger than Jack Eichel. Although it hasn't translated to any making the playoffs for Buffalo, Tuch has still been a very good player. Krebs did bust, and Ostland is struggling a little bit in the AHL, but I still think he can turn into something. And that second-round pick was used to get Jordan Greenway. I wish that they kept it to keep Riley Heidt, who was used by this Minnesota Wild, ended up selecting Riley Heidt. But yeah, not a disaster for Buffalo, especially when we get into some other Buffalo deals. Not a disaster by any stretch for Buffalo. They still got a very, very good player in this deal for Jack Eichel. A deal that maybe isn't looking as good is the Sam Reinhart deal. Reinhart for Devon Levi and a 2022 first-round pick. Florida, A+. No shit here. Reinhart got acquired. He was only making $6.5 million for the next 3 seasons. His first 2 seasons, he was elite in Florida. Made a Stanley Cup final, was point per game 1 season. Then last year, only making 6.5, had a top 10 season in the entire NHL, wins a Stanley Cup. They've locked him up. He's yet again extremely elite, top 30 player in the entire NHL. So amazing deal for Florida, who didn't really need Devon Levi, although Spencer Knight, his future's up in the air. They still have a solid goalie future and didn't need a first-round pick. A+ for them. For Buffalo, I'm going to go with the C+ on this one. Kulich looks like he can be a solid middle 6 forward, but it's more so Levi that I'm concerned with at this point. Really busted onto the scenes at the end of the 2023 season when he almost helped Buffalo make the playoffs. But in the last 2 years at the NHL level in 32 games, he is an .892. He has been good in the AHL, but yeah, it's a little bit concerning. He's 23 years old at this point. Still think he can turn into a solid 1B to UPL, but not quite the package that we thought after like the first year of this trade when Reinhart was good for Florida, but not exactly great. And Levi looked like he was trending. Kulich looked like he was trending. We thought maybe Buffalo won this deal, but clearly it's now looking like Florida. No shit. Even regardless, Kulich and Levi could turn into Hall of Famers, and Florida still wins this deal to a degree, considering they won a Stanley Cup. But you get what I mean. Florida's definitely winning right now. The Seth Jones trade, monster deal. Seth Jones, a 2021 first-round pick that was 32nd overall, 2022 6th-round pick to Columbus for Adam Boquist, a 2021 first-round pick that was 12th overall, a 2021 second-round pick, a 2022 first-round pick. As you can see what those picks turned into. Sillinger, Hemo Salmi, Juracek, and Nolan Allen. For Chicago, I mean, it's about as F as a trade gets. It like single-handedly sent them into a rebuild. They needed a rebuild before that. They just shouldn't have done this deal whatsoever. It's such a disaster, considering Seth Jones wasn't even good his last 2 seasons in Columbus. They trade for him. They trade a package again, 6th overall. It turned into the 6th overall pick and the 12th overall pick, and then you give him an 8-year deal at $9.5 million. And the crazy thing with that deal is, similarly to a Jonathan Huberdeau, they're going to rebuild, and hopefully they're going to be a playoff team in 2 to 3 years. This deal's still going to have freaking 3 years left on it. It's such a disaster that they're going to have to eventually attach a first or a second round pick to potentially dump it, although they're talking about right now, or they're going to have to retain right now some money on it to move him out. But yeah, big time out. Even though Nolan Allen actually has been a pretty decent rookie this year, I think he's like second among rookie defensemen, but that's a testament to the fact that there's like no rookie defenseman, because I think he has like 10 points in 44 games. Disaster for the Chicago Blackhawks. For Columbus, though, it hasn't really turned into a slam dunk. I'm going to go with an A- just because not paying Seth Jones was clearly the right move, and they did get a sizable haul from it. Sillinger, after his rookie season when he had like 32 points at 18 years old, you had really high expectations for. He's bounced back a little bit this season, but the underlying numbers are pretty shit. And Jiricek, it just didn't work out. They did thankfully trade him for a bunch of assets, like a first, second, and third. So they're going to get a second go with kind of prospects on that regard. Or maybe you flip that for roster players, considering Columbus has been such a good team. But yeah, I'm going to go with an A- for Columbus. It was trending. Once they selected Jiricek, I'm like, holy shit, this is like an A+. It's one of the greatest trades of all time. Have not quite developed into that. It has kind of aged a little bit poor. But still, obviously a win for the Columbus Blue Jackets, considering Seth Jones was a ticking time bomb once you gave him that extension. The OEL deal, another horrendous defenseman deal for Vancouver. I'm going to go with the C-. OEL is going to be affecting this team for multiple years, even though he's not on the team, considering they had to buy him out. It's a $2.35 million cap hit this season, 4.77 the following 2 years, and then 2.13. But it's not an F, or not even in the Ds, because they did get Connor Garland, who has been really good for them, and this season has been his best season, only making $4.95 million, as well as having another season at 4.95. So he's definitely been surplus value. It hasn't made up for the OEL, considering the fact when he played there, he was not close to $7.2 million after retention or something like that. And now you have the buyout. So still shit for Vancouver, but there was a good piece to this. As for Arizona and now Utah, easy A+, although you don't like giving up a guy like Connor Garland, considering the fact that he has been so good. He didn't really fit their timeline. I guess he was kind of the same age as Logan Cooley. No, Clayton Keller, Jesus. But yeah, moving off him and getting the 9th overall pick that eventually turned into Dylan Guenther is what turns this into an A+. Now, Guenther and Cooley are one of the most exciting young duos in hockey, and Dylan Guenther is looking like his floor is going to be 35 goals, 35 assists, considering that's basically what he's done the last season and a half at 20 and 21 years old, and you have him locked up at 8 years at $7.1 million. And again, what was massive about this deal is considering the fact that Arizona didn't have a first-round pick in the 2021 draft because they got a first and a second taken away because they worked out prospects during COVID, which I think was far too harsh of a punishment, a first and a second-round pick. Crazy, absolutely crazy. Similarly, like to Donov getting a first-round pick taken away. So Arizona didn't have a first, and then they say, oh, we'll give you OEL, and we'll package Garland. And as a result, they got one of their core franchise pieces. Next up, we got Patrik Laine PLD trade. When looking at this one, it was Patrik Laine and Jack Roslovic for Pierre-Luc Dubois in the 2022 third-round pick. For Winnipeg, I'm going to go with an A. I think Laine was probably a better player on Columbus than PLD was on Winnipeg. But of course, what happened after that, what happened with their trades when they eventually departed both teams, is what leads to this being a good deal for the Winnipeg Jets, considering the fact that they got Velarde in that high second-round pick. And as for Columbus, I'm going to go with the B-. Laine had some good point-per-game seasons, but then you had to attach a second-round pick just to dump him. Things got really ugly at the end there, considering Laine just refused to really play for the team. And yeah, you gave up a decent asset just to dump him. Meanwhile, Winnipeg got a bunch of good assets to trade him away. Next up, Buchnevich to the St. Louis Blues for Sammy Blais in a second-round pick. St. Louis, this gets an A. Buchnevich was amazing on that 4-year deal at $5.8 million, nearly like point per game on that deal. The only problem, well, actually, this is the last year of the deal. The first 3 years of the deal, he was around point per game. The only reason it's not an A+ is considering this year he's been a little bit underwhelming, 31 points in 47 games, and he has a 6-year deal at $8 million kicking in, so there's maybe some concern in the future that this might not age well, but still, gave up a second-round pick in Sammy Blais, and St. Louis had some decent seasons with Pavel Buchnevich. For the New York Rangers, it's clearly an F. If they had Buchnevich, I don't think that they win the Cup in 2022, but maybe they make the Cup final. They weren't beating that Colorado Avalanche team. That team was an absolute wagon. But in 2024, maybe they win the Stanley Cup if they have Pavel Buchnevich. If you have Buchnevich with Zibanejad or Kreider or Panarin and Trocheck on that second line, it's ridiculous. Instead, they decided to sign Barclay Goodrow at $3.6 million. They should have not done that and clearly traded someone away that made around $3 million and re-signed Buchnevich again at only $5.8 million. What a goddamn disaster. And as a result, the Rangers have come up short in the playoffs the last couple of years. If I got to be fair. If I'm a fair person, I will include the Devon Toews trade, which I am. Devon Toews, 2 second-round picks for Devon Toews. If I'm going to bring up Buchnevich, I got to do the Islanders Ellis as well. For Colorado, easy A+. He was the perfect partner and still is the perfect partner for Cale Makar. They signed him for only 4 years at $4.1 million. Won the Stanley Cup on that. Toews has, across that deal, has been a top 15 defenseman in the entire NHL. Amazing asset management by the Colorado Avalanche to get a top 15 defenseman for not even a first-round pick. For the New York Islanders, it's disgraceful. Again, you think about the Islanders, maybe they win the Stanley Cup in 2021 if they have Devon Toews, considering they were 2 goals short in that Game 7 against Tampa Bay, and I personally believe that they would have steamrolled the Montreal Canadiens. And even from 2022 up until now, I'm not saying they would have been cup contenders, but they would have been far more impressive, far more a better team if they had a top 4 of Dobson, Toews. Amazing top pair. Pelech, Polak is the second pair. They could have potentially went on a deep run any of those given years if they still had Devon Toews, who has been a top 15 defenseman. And the funny thing about this trade, again, is they ended up trading that 2021 second-round pick in the Andrew Ladd deal. They attached Andrew Ladd to dump salary cap space to keep far inferior players in that 2021 offseason that they weren't willing to do in the 2020 offseason to keep a guy that was an analytical darling that just needed more ice time. So absolute disaster. And then the last deal that we have on this, it's a little bit of cheating considering it is a 2019 deal, but again, it happened 2 weeks before the 2020, so I wanted to include it, and it is a massive deal. The Taylor Hall deal that sent Taylor Hall for Kevin Ball, Nate Schnarr, Nicholas Merkley, 2020 conditional first, and a 2021 third. When looking at this, for Arizona, I'm going to give them a B-. They went for it, and I really respect that for Arizona, who has kind of been the cheapest team in the NHL in that 2019-2020 season. They had a good team, and they decided to go after the top, pending unrestricted free agent, top deadline target. It didn't work out, but they did make the playoffs for the first time since 2012, so I guess it worked out to a degree, but they lost in the first round. So yeah, not good. They would have been better off right now clearly getting Dawson Mercer, but they were smart to let Taylor Hall walk instead of kind of re-sign him. And for the New Jersey Devils, I'm going to go with an A. They got Dawson Mercer. They were smart to move off Taylor Hall a year and a half after winning the Hart. They said, we're not quite ready to win now. Let's trade him. Let's be smart. And clearly, if Taylor Hall, let's say Taylor Hall in the summer of 2019 signed some 8-year deal at $8.5 million, Devils would be in a rough spot. They'd still be in a very good spot, but like a rough spot with that contract. They were smart. They ended up getting Dawson Mercer, who has not replicated his 2023 form when he had 27 goals, 29 assists, 56 points, but he's still been a very effective player for them and cost controlled right now at only $4 million. So yeah, those are the biggest deals of the 2020s. Let me know any ones that I maybe forgot or just like one of the ones that your team's made, and I'll drop some grades for it below. But yeah, thanks for sticking with me during this long one, and I'll be seeing the next one. Peace. Maybe we'll have a JT Miller or Elias Pettersson deal tonight at 8 p.m. See ya.